What if I told you that the US government, the world's largest economy, the issuer of the dominant global currency, the most powerful financial machine on earth, could suddenly run out of cash? Without being bankrupt, what if the system failed, not because the money disappeared, but because the mechanisms that move that money simply froze? And what if all of this could happen overnight, triggered by events already set in motion years ago? Today, we're diving into a financial time bomb almost no one is talking about. Not inflation, not debt, not recession, but something far more dangerous: the 2026 liquidity trap, a silent failure that could paralyze the government, freeze markets, delay Social Security payments, and ripple across every part of the global economy. Most people assume printing money solves everything, but in 2026, printing money may actually be the reason the government runs out of cash. Let me show you why. For over 80 years, the US government has funded itself through a simple cycle: spend more than it earns, borrow the difference, pay old debt using new debt, rely on global demand for US bonds. It's a system built on confidence and on liquidity. But here's the twist. The US doesn't need investors to love its debt. It just needs investors to show up. Treasury markets are the plumbing of the entire financial world. Every day, banks use treasuries as collateral. Pension funds use them as anchors. Corporations rely on them for short-term financing, and foreign governments buy them to stabilize their currencies. But this system has a hidden flaw. It only works as long as auctions never fail, dealers never step back, liquidity never evaporates, and confidence never breaks. In 2026, all four are at risk simultaneously. And that's why we need to trace how we got here. Let's rewind. In 1971, the dollar is unchained when Nixon ends the gold standard. The US dollar becomes free-floating, untethered, driven entirely by confidence. The result? Government spending explodes. Debt becomes a tool, not a burden. Through the 80s and 90s, we entered the age of leverage. The US embraced financial deregulation, derivatives, debt-funded growth, and rising deficits. Treasuries became the world's safest asset. Every nation wanted them. Then, 2008 was the first warning shot. The global financial crisis almost broke the Treasury market. Primary dealers froze, repo markets malfunctioned, and the Fed had to intervene with unprecedented force. But the lesson wasn't learned. When COVID hit in 2020, the government issued $5 trillion in new bonds practically overnight. The Fed bought a huge portion of them. It worked, temporarily. But the fallout is permanent. Inflation surged, interest rates climbed, foreign demand weakened, and the US became reliant on massive short-term borrowing, which leads us directly into the eye of the storm. Most people don't know this, but 2026 is the biggest bond rollover year in American history. More than $8.9 trillion of US government debt matures in a single 12-month window. That means the Treasury must refinance old debt, issue new debt, and cover deficits all at the same time. Normally, this wouldn't be a problem. Treasury markets always have buyers, but 2026 is different. First, the Federal Reserve cannot lower rates. Inflation remains stubborn. Cutting rates risks another inflation wave, so borrowing stays expensive. Second, foreign buyers are pulling back. Japan, China, and Saudi Arabia are reducing exposure. BRICS countries are shifting toward gold and local currencies. Demand for treasuries is weakening. Third, primary dealers are overloaded. Post-2008 regulations limit their balance sheets. They physically cannot absorb the tsunami of debt arriving in 2026. Fourth, reverse repo balances are drying up. The $2 trillion liquidity pool from 2021 to 2022 is nearly depleted. This removes the Fed's safety cushion. Finally, U.S. deficits are exploding. Even in peace, the U.S. is running $1.5 to $2 trillion deficits annually. In 2026, mandatory spending jumps again. Put those pieces together, and you get a frightening picture. The U.S. government may not be able to find enough buyers to fund itself. And that is how a liquidity trap forms. Let's walk through the exact chain of events that could trigger a sudden, overnight cash crisis. It starts with a Treasury auction that fails. The government auctions off billions in bonds, but buyers don't show up, or they demand yields far higher than the Treasury can accept. When demand collapses, yields spike. That means the cost of refinancing explodes. Even a 1% jump in yield means hundreds of billions in extra interest costs. Next, primary dealers resist. Wall Street banks like JP Morgan, Citi, and Goldman are legally obligated to buy treasuries, but their balance sheets have limits. In 2026, many of them are already stretched, so they take only the minimum or stop bidding aggressively or offload treasuries immediately after purchase. When primary dealers step back, liquidity disappears. The market structure collapses. Bid-ask spreads widen. Buyers hesitate, prices become unstable. Suddenly, the world's safest market becomes untradeable. Then, the repo system breaks. Banks use treasuries as collateral to borrow daily cash. If treasury prices tank, banks can't borrow, hedge funds face margin calls, and money market funds pull back. Liquidity evaporates. Finally, the U.S. government runs out of cash. Without liquidity, the Treasury cannot refinance. Taxes cannot cover daily bills, yet maturing debt must still be paid. This moment, when the government cannot execute payments, is the 2026 liquidity trap. It's not bankruptcy, it's paralysis. Most people think a government cash crisis would take weeks or months, but liquidity crises hit instantly. If the Treasury market freezes, Social Security benefits could be delayed. A delay of even 24 to 48 hours would trigger panic. Military and federal salaries become uncertain. The stock markets would crash as Treasury volatility spreads like wildfire. The bond markets would enter chaos. Corporate borrowing would halt. Mortgage rates would spike. State pensions, which hold trillions in treasuries, would be hit like a sledgehammer by a yield spike. Banks would face a collateral crisis. When the value of treasuries drops, collateral disappears. Banks tighten credit. Small businesses lose access to loans. Liquidity evaporates everywhere, not just in government debt. This is how a liquidity trap becomes an economic heart attack. If you found this breakdown valuable, subscribe for more deep dive analysis into the hidden mechanics shaping our financial future. Because the closer we get to 2026, the more critical it becomes to understand the truth behind the numbers.